China didn't invent its economic miracle. It copied it from its enemies, and the irony is almost too perfect to believe. Here's what people don't understand. When Deng Xiaoping opened China's economy in 1978, he wasn't inventing something new. He was stealing a playbook, the playbook that had defeated China for a century. The playbook written by Britain, refined by America, and perfected by Japan. Let's start with the brutal truth. China was humiliated. The Opium Wars, the unequal treaties, foreign powers carving up Chinese ports like a birthday cake, and China's leaders watched. They watched how Britain used trade to build empire. They watched how America used corporations to project power. They watched how Japan industrialized in 30 years. That was the first crack. The realization that capitalism wasn't just an ideology. It was a weapon system. Here's the pattern. Every rising power follows the same stages. First, they get crushed by an advanced economy. Second, they send students to study the enemy. Third, they protect infant industries behind walls. Fourth, they steal technology systematically. Fifth, they subsidize exports to flood markets. Sixth, they use currency manipulation to stay competitive. Seventh, they dominate. Britain did this to the Dutch. America did this to Britain. Japan did this to America. And China watched every single move. Let me show you exactly how this works. Case study 1. Britain versus the Dutch, 1700 to 1800. The mechanism was simple. The Dutch had the most advanced textile industry in Europe. British merchants couldn't compete, so Britain banned Dutch textiles completely. Then they paid Dutch workers to defect and bring their knowledge to England. Then they subsidized British manufacturers. Then they used the Royal Navy to protect British trade routes while destroying Dutch shipping. Within a century, Britain owned the global textile trade. The Dutch East India Company collapsed. The outcome was total. Britain became the workshop of the world by copying and crushing the system that came before. And that's when everything breaks, when the student becomes the master. Case study 2. America versus Britain, 1800 to 1900. The mechanism was tariffs and theft. Alexander Hamilton's entire economic plan was simple. Steal British technology. Protect American factories with massive tariffs. Build infrastructure with government money. Ignore British patents completely. American textile mills were exact copies of British mills. American engineers were often British defectors. The tariff rates reached 60%. Britain screamed about unfair trade. America didn't care. By 1900, American steel production exceeded Britain's. American GDP was the world's largest. The outcome was decisive. America used Britain's own playbook to overthrow British economic dominance. Here's what people miss. This isn't cheating. This is the system. Every economic superpower climbs the ladder, then kicks it away. Case study 3. Japan versus America, 1950 to 1990. The mechanism was MITI, the Ministry of International Trade and Industry. Post-war Japan was destroyed. MacArthur's occupation reformed the economy. But Japanese bureaucrats learned something crucial. They learned how to use capitalism as a weapon while keeping it under state control. MITI picked industries: steel, shipbuilding, electronics, automobiles. Then the government restricted foreign competition. Then they gave loans at negative real interest rates. Then they created export cartels that could dump products below cost. American companies screamed about unfair competition. Japan kept winning. By 1985, Japan produced more cars than America. Japanese companies owned American assets. The Plaza Accord tried to stop it by forcing yen appreciation. But by then the pattern was complete. Japan had learned capitalism from America and used it to challenge American dominance. That was the template. That was the blueprint. And Deng Xiaoping had studied all three. Let me be very specific about what China learned. Lesson 1 from Britain. Use trade as statecraft. Britain never just traded. Every trade agreement was a power projection tool. The Opium Wars weren't about drugs. They were about forcing China to accept British terms. China learned this backwards. They learned that controlling trade means controlling outcomes. Lesson 2 from America. Steal technology without shame in 1812. Francis Cabot Lowell literally memorized British textile machinery designs because he couldn't smuggle out blueprints. He built them from memory in Massachusetts. This was celebrated as American ingenuity. China learned that technology theft is just late-stage industrialization. Lesson 3 from Japan. The state picks winners. MITI didn't let markets decide. Bureaucrats decided which industries mattered. Then they flooded those industries with capital, protection, and support. Markets worked within boundaries set by the state. China learned that capitalism doesn't require democracy or free markets. It requires results. Here's where it gets interesting. China had an advantage none of the others had. Size. Britain was an island. America was isolated. Japan was resource poor. China had 800 million potential workers. When Deng opened the economy, he had the largest labor force in human history. The stages happened fast. Stage 1. Special economic zones in Shenzhen, Zhuhai, Shantou, Xiamen. 1980. These were laboratories. Controlled experiments in capitalism inside a communist state. Foreign companies could enter, but only in these zones, only under Chinese terms. Stage 2. Technology transfer requirements. Here's the mechanism. You want to sell to Chinese consumers? Fine. Build a factory in China. Partner with a Chinese company. Transfer your technology. Train Chinese engineers. This wasn't hidden. It was policy. Western companies accepted because the market was too big to ignore. Stage 3. Currency management. The yuan was kept artificially low. Chinese exports became irresistible. American consumers bought Chinese goods because they were cheap. American manufacturers couldn't compete. The trade deficit exploded. China accumulated dollars, mountains of dollars, trillions of dollars. Stage 4. Industrial policy at scale. Beijing picked industries, solar panels, high-speed rail, telecommunications, electric vehicles, semiconductors. Then state banks provided unlimited cheap credit. Then the government guaranteed purchases. Then Chinese companies could sell at a loss until foreign competitors died. Stage 5. Moving up the value chain. China didn't stay in cheap manufacturing. They moved into smartphones, cloud computing, artificial intelligence, quantum research, space technology. Each step followed the pattern. Learn from abroad. Adapt for China. Dominate the market. Here's what really happened. China didn't just copy capitalism. They copied the entire historical pattern of how rising powers use capitalism. To overthrow existing powers, they studied the British Empire. They studied American industrial policy. They studied Japanese state capitalism. Then they executed all three simultaneously at a scale never before attempted, and it worked. Catastrophically well. From America's perspective, perfectly well. From China's, let me show you the numbers. 1978. China's GDP was $150 billion. 2023, $18 trillion, 120 times larger. 700 million people lifted from poverty. The fastest economic transformation in human history. And it happened by studying enemies. Here's the deeper pattern. Rising powers don't defeat established powers by being different. They defeat them by being better at the same game. Britain beat the Dutch by out-mercantiling them. America beat Britain by out-industrializing them. Japan beat America at manufacturing by being more disciplined at American methods. China is beating everyone by being more capitalist than the capitalists. That's the philosophical inversion. China learned that capitalism isn't about freedom. It's about production. It's not about markets. It's about power. It's not about ideology. It's about outcomes. The West believed capitalism and democracy were inseparable. China proved they aren't. You can have state control and market mechanisms. You can have one-party rule and economic dynamism. You can learn from your enemies without becoming them. Here's where the pattern gets dangerous. Every rising power that followed this path eventually faced a reckoning. Britain faced World War I. America faced the Great Depression. Japan faced the lost decades after the asset bubble burst. The pattern doesn't end with triumph. It ends with the next crisis. China is entering the late stages now. The debt levels are staggering. Local governments are insolvent. The property sector is collapsing. The population is aging faster than any country in history. The zero-COVID lockdowns revealed the limits of state control. The technology decoupling with America is accelerating. Youth unemployment is at record highs. The growth model that worked for 40 years is breaking down. But here's what people don't understand. This is part of the pattern too. Every economic miracle hits a wall. The question isn't whether China faces problems. The question is whether they learned enough from their enemies to solve those problems the way Britain, America, and Japan eventually did through reinvention. The British Empire collapsed, but Britain survived by becoming a financial center. American manufacturing declined, but America dominated technology and services. Japan's growth stalled, but Japan maintained high living standards and technological leadership. Each adapted, each survived, each learned again.